the Air Corps had no drill instructors. And it was pretty good. I don't know how many weeks it was, but we got through it. You know, there was a lot of marching around and stuff like that.
Did you ever get a chance to shoot any real guns?
Oh yeah. Before I went overseas, I was in weather and meteorology. I was non-combatant, but they wanted to make sure when you got overseas, if the war had any adversities, that they could put you in the infantry. And they gave you 47 days, what they call overseas training. And that was in Kearns, Utah, just before you go over. You had like a week of throwing hand grenades, a week of bayonet practice. Everything was thorough, you know. So you had a very good infantry background when you come out of that. And then they send you directly from there overseas.
Did the infantry training come before or after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Well, it was before, yeah, because we had we were there, we were about 4 or 5 months before Pearl Harbor, but we didn't think there was going to be a war. Everybody had in for a furlough because it was getting near Christmas. And then when they did bomb it, of course everything was by radio, there were no television. They said, this may get us into war and all. And most of the guys said, well, we don't think so, that's the Hawaiians, that ain't us. And we weren't sure. They sunk a big part of the 7th Fleet at that time. So we were
some of the guys
naive.
Some of the guys thought Hawaii was a foreign country.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was an American possession at the time. I think that we acquired it after the war. I'm not sure.
No, it was a territory. So you got through boot camp okay, and you got through infantry training okay, right?
Yeah. And then we got a lot of different duties. Then they would send you to a technical school. So I went to a weather school, meteorology, at MacDill Field in Florida. Because I kept taking the test for flying. The written was a breeze. I knew airplanes good, but I couldn't pass the eye test too good. I could see 20/20, but they had a depth perception test where you line these things up to see. And I was not good at that. I didn't pass that. I took it several times, but I never was successful at it, you know. Then we went to weather school. That was in Florida, at MacDill Field. And then they send you to a few weather stations in the States. Like my first one was in Florida there. And then after that, you go overseas. But the weather was interesting, and it was very primitive. There weren't much equipment that would give you modern weather forecasting like today. For instance, we used to send up a weather balloon, about 2 or 3 feet in diameter, and you follow it, and you had earphones on, and every 1,000 feet you would get a buzz, and then you gave them the angle. You had what they call a theodolite. It was like a little telescope, but it had azimuth and elevation. And you gave them that, and they would plot the winds up, you know, along. And at night, they had like a Japanese lantern, a Chinese lantern, tissue paper. You had a candle on the bottom. They put a candle. You tied that to the balloon. And which wasn't better them days because the balloon had hydrogen in it. But we'd send that up and you follow it at night. Then if you got the same reading twice, it means you're locked onto a star. You couldn't see the balloon, which was easy to do, you know. We made our own hydrogen.
You had a hydrogen generating machine?
Yeah, it's like a cylinder. It looked like a bottle gas cylinder. And the 2 ingredients was ferrosilicate, which is like a black powder, and caustic soda, which was like soap thing, was caustic. And then you add water. But once you put the final thing was this ferrosilicate. It only took a little bit. If you put too much, it would blow the safety valve. You didn't want. So you put everything in, you put that in last, and then screw the cap on quick. If you didn't get it on quick, it would come out. It would come out like pancake batter. It would stick to the ceiling.
Well, you mentioned that you did go overseas eventually. Where did you go?
To Africa. Yeah, we went from Kearns, Utah to Newport News. And there we just for a week or two there, you know, waiting for the ship. But the boats were right there, everything was right on the thing. And they were, whenever we went out on the pier, there were a Liberty ship and a Victory ship. We thought we'd go on the Victory, it was a bigger boat, but no, it went on the Liberty ship. And a little band would come out on the pier and play Carry Me Back to Old Virginia or something. It was an army band. I come back from overseas 2 years later. I landed at the same pier on the other side. The little band was there again. So I figured if there was ever another war, I'd get a job in that little band.
Because they never left the United States. Sounds like a pretty good deal. And so you went to North Africa, I guess.
North Africa, yeah.
Whereabouts was that? In Oran?
Well, Cairo. In Cairo, we were based out of Cairo. That was Egypt, of course.
Yeah.
But we went over. It took us about 4 weeks in the Mediterranean. It was a big, large convoy. And then I figured, well, when we got to Straits of Gibraltar, we're here. But it's another week in the Mediterranean. I had no idea the Mediterranean was so big. Mm-hmm. Then we went through the Suez Canal and got off at Port Suez on the bottom. And then we went to Cairo from there.
Were you concerned about enemy submarines when you were crossing the Atlantic?
Yeah, when we first went over, when we were on the ocean, they had an alert there was a sub in the area, and we all, of course, we kept your life preserver on 24 hours a day anyway. And we're looking, and they were petered out, but nothing happened. So then we figured, well, that's the end of that. But when we were in the Mediterranean, they were talking about subs, but we figured there shouldn't be any left there now. And the second boat of weathermen come over got torpedoed about a month later. No one got killed though. They had a locomotive or something in the hull of the ship, and the torpedoes that sort of cushioned the blow, I guess, you know. But they go over.
Were you attached to a particular air force?
Well, it's to the 19th Weather Region. That took in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Persian Gulf, and most of Arabia. So we had weather stations strung out across North Africa, and they go up the northern route, if you went along North Africa. And we had maybe 5 or 6 weather stations, that's all, you know, across. And we used to go from one to another, they transfer, you know. And it took 14 hours, I think, to get from Cairo to Casablanca in the old C-47. Yeah, we go mostly at night because the Germans were still active in that area.
The German Air Force was still active?
Yeah, they were in Italy yet.
Right.
Yeah, they were on fly out, you know, from Italy. So what we do is, and the C-47 has no armament or anything to shoot back with. So we fly at night, and they just have the dashboard lit up. They wouldn't have anything else. It'd be going in the dark, you know. That was supposed to be a safety,
Yeah.
something like that. So then from Cairo, they send you out into the desert to various weather stations. Of course, you only have 4 or 5 weathermen at a weather station. And then you have 4 radio men. Someone got to send the weather back up. And after you're out on a month or 2, they recall you to Cairo so you don't get sand happy from being alone. There's nothing out there. It's just, you know, the biggest thing. Because the Sahara Desert is as big as from here to California. It's bigger than the block of the 48 states. It's a very large desert, you know. Then they had the southern route that went from Dakar across, and that's what I was on. I went to Asmara. I was stationed in Asmara. That's a town. It's almost like a little city, about 60 miles in from the Red Sea, but it's 8,000 feet up. It's on a plateau, so the weather is nice. When you take off, we used to fly like at 3,000 feet. You take off and you drop down a couple of thousand feet after you get off the thing. So that was my first assignment in Asmara. And it was good, it was a nice town for Africa. It had an opera house and all like that. And then went from there to Salalah, Arabia. That's on the southern coast of Arabia, about halfway between the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. I stayed there a while. Then they sent me to Egypt, French Morocco. That's south of Marrakesh, which is south of Casablanca. Then from there, they sent me to the Persian Gulf, to Bahrain Island. So when the war ended, I was in the Persian Gulf, but a lot of people figure, well, you got too old, and in the Gulf War, nobody knows. A lot of people haven't heard of the Persian Gulf up till then. When we flew wherever we went, there were no other transportation.
So there's been wars going on in that part of the world for a long time.
Yeah, oh yeah, North Africa they had it. And then the southern route, along the southern part of Arabia, they had that open because the first thing was they were going to bomb Japan from land, from China or someplace like that. And they had B-29s, so you had the range. But for some reason, they thought it was impractical. They would have to do it from the islands instead. Whether there were still Japs in China at that time, I don't know what the holdup was. But that was the idea, keeping that southern route open. And when we give the weather out, we give it in cold. Never give it in the clear. The reason for that was Japanese submarines in the Indian Ocean, they pick up your weather. They wanted to know the weather all the time. So we didn't code it. But they figured the Germans would figure it out in 24 hours. They had some kind of a decoding system. But in 24 hours, the weather changes, so you don't lose anything.
So you were in Bahrain when the war ended? The war in Europe?
Bahrain Island, yeah. They were over about 2 years. I had put 3 years in the States, and then, because at them days when you enlisted, it was for 3 years. And then, once the war broke out, it was for the duration. You just stayed there till the war was over.
Was there any casualties in your unit? Anybody get lost line?
No. There were 78 weathermen, I think. And 2 of them got killed, but that was from flying. One plane went down south of Cairo, and a friend there got killed. But and someone else died, but that was from bad water. The water is no good in that part of the world, so got something out of it and died.
It's quite a cultural change from the Bronx to Egypt and places like that.
Oh yeah. But it was kind of education. I had a furlough, called like a leave there, and you could either go to Rome or Palestine. Then it was all Palestine, and Rome was bombed out then for a while. And they say the water was not very good there. But Palestine, they had everything. They had milk, they never had much milk in that part of the world. But there were never any trees. When I come home from overseas, one of the big things was to see trees again, So I spent a week or 2 in Palestine. Went around the Holy Land. They had tours and stuff.
You got to see the Holy Land.
Oh yeah, it was in Bethlehem and Jordan and like that. And when you fly over, you can see the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea at the same time if you got enough altitude. Then the Jordan sort of connects them. But when you hear about it, you don't think everything is so small. But we just took an extra. We were coming from the Gulf and we swung around there. We had enough gas before we landed at Cairo. And then the last time I ever flew was to go swimming. We flew from Cairo to Alexandria because we had a weather plane, a C-47. But you had to talk the pilot into wanting to go swimming, and you had to have something like 15 guys because they didn't want to waste the fuel. But they would let you go because the war was winding down. And the Nile, you couldn't swim in the Nile. It was disease like. So in the Mediterranean it wasn't that bad. We flew there, but that's the last time I was ever in an airplane. So yeah, that was in a jet. I was in hundreds of jets making them. Because after the war I worked in Grumman, and we made fighters for the Navy. But I never flew in one.
So you weren't in any combat situation where you were?
No, it was just lucky at the time. The only thing they were worried about was getting overrun by natives, like Arabs or something like that. But like I say, there's only 8 of us altogether, the weather stations, and they were hundreds of miles apart. And we had small arms, because wherever you have codes, you have to have a machine gun or automatic weapons to protect the codes. And you had a regular system to destroy them if you get overrun. And we never had a problem like that.
These Arabs were bandits, or were they working for the Germans, or?
No, they were just family people, I guess. They had little families of them. The one thing that used to strike me was when we'd fly, we'd be about 3 or 4 hours out of Cairo, we'd go towards Casablanca, and down in the middle of the desert, you'd see a family, a guy and a woman, I guess, and kids and a camel. We wondered, where are they going, or how, they must know where the water was, Then,
Did you get any medals or citations during the time you were in?
well, they just had European, North African medal, campaign medal, something like that. And we didn't get any.
Was there any chance that they were going to send you to the Pacific when the European War ended?
They could, could do it. Yeah, of course, I was still, young enough. I was still in my 20s. And that was the practice. They'd done that sometimes. They we come back, they had a part of the army from Italy there that had fought in Italy, and there were rumors that they might send them, if you go back to the States and they send you somewhere else. But when you get back, you don't go right home. You go what they call a rehabilitation thing to see if you're not wild from combat or crazy from being out on the desert or something like that. And after a few weeks, if you look halfway normal, they send you home without discharge.
Did some people really succumb to the pressure and like that out in the desert?
Oh yeah. One fellow was sent home. Well, they sent it home. And it's like when they go there, you get stationed in a tent or something there, and everybody's happy and this and that, Then after a few weeks, it gets near a month or so, you get very touchy, like say I wanted to borrow your writing paper, you'd snap it like, it's my paper. They were like an unfriendly atmosphere then. But what they've done when you come out of weather school, you could pick the guys you wanted to go with in the weather, guys that you get along with. Something like a submarine crew, I guess, they got to get along. Then they gave you a choice. We could have went to the Aleutians or to Africa. We figured all the action was in Africa. That's where, gung-ho spirit, we wanted to go there, And they broke the outfit up into 2 parts, and one part went first, and then we went. And we were months later, and we were all disappointed that they didn't send us 2. We wanted to, get in. But that first group got the head kicked out of them. Of course, Rommel was still alive. They didn't realize he was that good, I guess, or something. Because he was funny, like, he could fight, like, come up to the front, and then the next thing you know, he's behind you. He circles around and tried out. He must have studied up on tactics or something like that.
Desert Fox. You wrote the book. How did you keep in touch with your family while you were overseas?
Well, they had this V-mail. It's like a little cellophane slide. And they send that, and then I think they blow it up or something when it gets home. You only have a few words. But I sent me mostly by, they had like a telegram thing there, because that was an Italian radio station where we were at in Smara. And it was so much a word, which wasn't much. But what it was, like one number would mean I am fine, or write soon, or something. It meant a little paragraph almost, and just sent numbers. So they'd send maybe 4 or 5 digits, and that was the thing. But your family knew you were all right then when they got back.
And they would send you mail?
Yeah, we'd get mail, but we wouldn't get it till we got back to Cairo. I say we're based out of Cairo. When you're out in the desert, they don't even want to know you. You don't get paid for nothing else. You come in and then they sort of let you go on vacation or a furlough or something.
What did you do to entertain yourself? Did you have entertainment?
No, not really, not much. But when we were in Salalah in Arabia, of course, you were on the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean. I never knew for sure which was which, where one began and one ended. But that was swimming, that was good swimming. Because southern Arabia was just sand, all white sand, very little people. And we it's the only place I was at where we couldn't fly an American flag. Because we were there as guests of the Sultan. See, the big thing was to be friendly with him rather than take it by force, which wasn't good. So we couldn't put up a flag or anything. And when we went swimming or anything, he sent his guards. They're what they call the scarries. They're the Sultan's guards. That's all they do. They don't work or anything else. And they come swimming, and they say, oh, they protect you. And we thought they wanted to give us the impression they were protecting us from the people. The people weren't hostile at all. It was to protect the people from us. They didn't want us to say, well, you're poor, why don't you go out and get a job, or you'd be better off with a diplomatic or a democratic government. So they'd be always there. But it was the Middle East is a different part of the world as far as people go. Like, they don't smoke or they don't drink, but they don't think too much of killing. That's not a big thing. So when I was in Grumman, they had gave the Sultan, the Shah of Iran, airplanes, first-class fighters. And of course you had to send mechanics over to service them. So the guys were jumping around in Grumman, and he says, oh, well, we're going, we can take our families and all. So I told him, I said, I wouldn't take my family in that part of the world. Oh, no, this and that, Well, fortunately, they all got back about a month before the hostage situation and all that. But that part of the world, everybody, they think different, It's not the same as we think.
Did you, you mentioned where you traveled, and you mentioned you got a chance to go swimming and so forth.
Oh, yeah, that was in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in Arabia, part of Arabia. Of course, see, like the United States, when we plot a map or anything, we should plot a map every 4 hours, weather map.
Yep.
Then the forecaster would get it, and he would draw his ISO bars and forecast from it. Well, we had something like 500 stations to put on that map. Every day you just put temperature, humidity, wind direction. But when we got to Arabia, it was 5 stations. Now the whole thing, they weren't much. You'd done it all.
Did you operate pretty independently? You didn't have officers over you much?
No, I had very few officers, As a matter of fact, the Air Corps itself was more of a technical thing. Like if you worked on the flight line, if you're a mechanic or something, you didn't salute or anything. Every pilot was an officer. But Fort Benning was primarily an infantry thing. Of course, our commanding officer over the whole thing was Omar Bradley. And we went up to the main post, they call it, from the airport. And there was a young lieutenant. They had the infantry school there at the OCA. And we walked right past him like we were shopping or something. They go, halt. And we come back, and he says, don't you salute officers? The guy went, well, as a matter of fact, he's going to give him the story. Oh, this is one guy you go to salute. I think the guy was a week or 2 out of infantry school. But things like that, when you go for an interview, when you go for flying, you go before the board to the exam, see what kind of a character you are. And they asked me, they said, who's your commanding officer? So I said, Colonel Gates, Warner B. Gates. He's the commander of Lawson Field. No, he's not. They didn't think much of the Air Corps then. We were just a part of the Signal Corps. So I says, your commanding officer is Omar Bradley. Remember that name, Omar Bradley. As I'm leaving the room, I'm thinking, who could name their son Omar? It worked out, but I never seen him. He had a big mansion there because they had a couple of 100,000 troops. Fort Benning's like 80 miles around. It's the second biggest camp next to the one in Texas.
When they sent you back from Bahrain Island and you came back to the States?
Yeah, well, what happened?
What base did they put you in in the States?
I know it was in Virginia. Of course, we come back the same way. Then we went to Greensboro or Goldsboro, North Carolina. But coming back, you had a point system at the end of the war. You had so many points. Well, apparently I didn't have enough. So the boat left from Bahrain Island with different troops and stuff. But you got to go down the Persian Gulf, past southern Arabia, and back up the Red Sea through the Suez Canal. So when I didn't have enough points in here, so I said goodbye to my buddies in the Long Sea. Well, about a week later, the thing come through that, now I got enough points. So I flew to Cairo. I got there about 2 weeks ahead of the boat. And then when they came, they said, well, how'd you get here? What are you doing? But then we all went back on the same boat,
All the way back to Virginia?
Yeah, same boat, same pier and everything
This
else.
little band
Of
came
course,
out?
they were different trip, like they had movies at night, you
Oh,
could
yeah.
sit up and deck and walk.
Oh.
But going over, they didn't want, light matches or do anything, It was quiet,
Well, were you still in the Army when the war in Japan came to an end? VJ Day?
That was I come out in November 10th, I think, 45. Because they used to have a saying out getting home, the Golden Gate in 48. And they said, home alive in 45. That was the big thing then.
What did you do after you got out of the service?
Well, the first thing I did, I went ironwork and structural steel. Wanted to make big money, wanted to get married. So when I went there, my brother was already in it because he was in the Navy before. He says, I can get you a job, come down and the shop steward will interview you or whatever. And they had a desk and all these books that the Union has. It was Union 40 in Manhattan. They call it the skyscraper union. So I figured he'd go up and give me a barrage of questions and all. So I said, you're not afraid of falling down and getting killed, are you? So I said, no, I just got to get bum snaps, but you're in, That was a prerequisite for the thing, but I didn't. And then it's no different than you think like ironwork and doing the work, you're not just walking beams, because they say they're not paying you to be an acrobat, they pay you to put the building up. And then after that, I went to airplane school under the GI Bill.
Oh, you went on the GI Bill?
Oh, yeah, and then I got a license, airplane license, because at that time, if you worked at an airport, you had to have a licensed mechanic.
Okay.
And then I started at the airport, but there weren't much jobs around, and they wanted experience. It was one of that old thing, you have to have the experience, and if they don't give you a job, how do you get the experience? So then I went out to Grumman, because you didn't require that as a manufacturing place, and I got with them, and they went in as a hydraulic mechanic, with parts thing, and then they send you to school, like IBM now. So then I took up drafting, and I wound up in engineering there, which was pretty good, because I didn't finish high school.
So between the GI Bill and...
equivalency.
Yeah. So all of it was experience that you got on the job and GI Bill school?
Yeah.
But did you maintain contact with any of the people you were in the military with?
No, we used to get Christmas cards. You used to get Christmas. Now there's only one left. Last time I saw the guy, I was in North Africa with him. And he's living in Belmar, New Jersey or something, but I haven't seen him in over 50 years. But his job was, he was a radio man, to maintain all the radio stations along North Africa, help them. And he was a buck sergeant. That's all the rank they gave him. He was all that responsibility. But he loved radios and stuff. He was taking up television and stuff when we come out of the Army.
Did you belong to any veterans organizations?
Well, yeah, I belonged to the VFW, the American Legion.
How do you feel like your military experience affected your life overall?
Well, I think it was more educational, because I got in parts of the world that I couldn't afford to get now, When I come back, I really didn't go anywhere much, besides where I lived, I didn't travel too much. But there you travel all around. Here, of course, you had different bases, different things like that.
Never flew in an airplane again after you got out of service?
No, my last trip Who's that one that goes swimming in the Mediterranean? And never got to do it. I got, you know, like I said, we've made them and, you know, all like that, but,
What kind of airplanes did you work on at Grumman over the years?
well, there were the fighters. The first one was the Grumman Panther. That was the first jet they made. I got with them in 1949. That was already in production. And then they had different ones in between, the Cougar and like that. But then they came up with the F-14, Tomcat, and they're still using it.
Boy.
And that was the last one I worked on. That was 30 years ago. They still using that same airplane. You know? But, they said during the war, though, it was simpler because it was a propeller type. Instead of a stock room or anything, they'd come along and pile stuff that went into that airplane on the floor of Grumman, you know, and they'd make the airplane from that. You know, and they had pretty good mechanics. But I think their top thing during the war, they made 500 a month. But that, I'm not sure they done it all in that plant, because they used to farm out airplane manufacturing to automobile companies.
Yeah.
Like Ford had the Willow Run, he had the big thing, and they, you know, make them too. So we were making a lot of airplanes in the end.
Yep.
And they had more planes, I guess, than pilots, you know.
Yeah.
So that was the big thing. I wanted to become a fighter pilot. I never did. But then when I see, looking back, the thing like the 375th Fighter Group, that was the one that Yeager was in them. They had 100% casualties over the years. Like they had to keep sending new pilots. They were getting killed right and left. And they were good pilots. You know. And then I had to think twice too. Maybe it was a blessing that I did fail the test. I still always liked flying. I always liked airplanes and stuff. Lean towards that.
Well, thank you for sharing your experiences with us here today.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No.